Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going back to rural places to explore and experience the horrors that happen in the middle of nowhere. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In the fall of 1997, my mother took me, my sister, and my sister's boyfriend out to the movies in a neighbouring town. My sister got to pick the movie, and the only showing we could watch was a late one, so we didn't manage to start our way home until around 11 p.m. We were close to home, driving down a back road in the middle of nowhere. I was asleep in the front seat, and my sister and her boyfriend were in the back. A cop car came up behind us and drove behind us for a while. Then after about 5 minutes of following us, turned his lights on. My mother says she hadn't been speeding and was aware that he had been following, but she pulled over. My mom and sister said that a man came to the window and didn't ask for ID or registration, and started asking my mum where she lived, saying that there had been a robbery nearby and her vehicle matched a description of the getaway car. He asked her to get out, and she said no. It was at that moment that my sister's boyfriend leaned his head into the front seat to see what was going on. He was the local sheriff's son, and the man must have recognized him because he immediately got nervous and told Mum to go home and walked back to his car. My sister's boyfriend said he didn't recognize the cop at all, and Mum drove around 20 more minutes in circles to make sure that he didn't follow us home. Mum would later tell me that there had been reports a few months later of a man pretending to be a cop in the area who would stop women and rape them. For the next 11 years, nothing else happened. But everyone pretty much forgot, or at least I did. But my mum always remembered. But then, weird stuff started happening at home. My mum and dad had gotten a divorce in 2002, and my sister went off to college in the same year. In 2003, we had moved to a house pretty much in the middle of nowhere, with very few neighbours. The lock on our door was loose, and I, being a forgetful high schooler, would often lose my keys and have to card my way inside after getting off the bus. One afternoon, in February 2008, I noticed a car come to a stop in front of my driveway. As I got up to the front door, I didn't think anything of it, but the car stayed there as I carded the door. If it stayed after, I didn't notice, but after that day is when someone started breaking in. Now, I don't think whoever watched me go inside could have seen that I carded the door, but they must have figured it out, because Mum and I would often come home to find things not the way we left them. Nothing was ever taken, but we could tell. One day, a painting above the couch in the living room ended up propped against the opposite wall. Another day, all of the medicine and first aid supplies were moved from above our washing machine to the kitchen table in neat rows. My mum began to suspect it was a woman named Susan, who was in love with my mum's boyfriend, trying to scare her into leaving him. There had been many arguments, and the woman had said something about watching her before, so it was natural for us to assume that. We ended up changing the locks about 4 months into 2008, after finding our house broken into about 5 times that we knew of. As it was 5 times we found things rearranged. That seemed to do the trick. However, whoever was harassing us found a new way to do so, and began calling my mother and me on our cell phones. It was always from a blocked number, and they never said anything. They would hang up the second we said hello, and they would call all hours of the day, at least 10 times a day. They would call me while I was at school, while Mum was at work, and we eventually stopped answering from any numbers that we didn't recognize, and after about 2 months, the calls stopped. My mother was still convinced it was Susan. I asked her why she would be calling me, and how she would have even gotten my number, and my mum didn't know. In late 2008, the Susan moved several towns away to be with her daughter, who had gotten pregnant. We were sure that meant an end to all the nonsense, and that we could forget about her. In early 2009, my boyfriend proposed to me while he was overseas in Iraq, and I started planning on moving away with him when he came back in May. One evening in March, I went wedding dress shopping with a friend of mine, who was also getting married around the same time as me. My mother was out of town, taking my grandmother to a specialist 9 hours away for an appointment, so I was home alone for the weekend. When I came home that night, I immediately noticed that something was wrong as I drove up the street. Every light in my house was on, even my mother's bedroom and bathroom lights, rooms that I had never been into since before she left. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw that the front door was wide open. I started to panic and called my friend's fiance, who lived about 5 minutes away, and told him I was too afraid to go inside. He showed up at the drop of a hat, checking the rooms for me. After 10 minutes, he came back out. He told me he had checked every room and closet, and there was nobody there, but that I needed to see my room. I followed him back into my room, and it had been ransacked. My drawers had been emptied out onto the floor. My closet had all the coats and shoes removed. My vanity cover had spilled makeup over it, and on my bed was my underwear. I checked my mother's room, and it was the same. My friend's fiance hid his car in our pasture and stayed awake in the living room all night, hoping whoever did that would come back, but they never did. I cleaned up the rooms and acted as if it hadn't have happened, but I didn't leave the house anymore. When I told my mum, she again blamed Susan. She told me she had found a pair of women's underwear at her boyfriend's house, and he had confessed that they were Susan's. She had confronted Susan, threatening to expose her to the church, as Susan was a pastor, and she assumed this was the woman's counter. While my mother just seemed to be getting angrier, I became intensely paranoid. On any given night, a noise outside or the glimpse of headlights would give me a panic attack. I was sure someone was after us, and my mother didn't believe me. It all came to a head one night in May at 3 in the morning. I was awake, waiting for a call from my fiance. My mother had long since gone to bed, and I noticed a flash of light through my curtains, and quickly became anxious. I told myself it was probably just a car or someone's porch light coming on, but I saw it again and again, roving the yards. It was a flashlight. I climbed out of bed and crept in the hallway, connected to the living room. There was a window right next to where the hall led into the living space, and I didn't dare move any further, as the shades were up. I could see the flashlight moving around the back of the house, and I waited for several minutes, and eventually could see it in the front yard again. My mother must have seen it too, because suddenly she was in the kitchen, next to the front window, whispering to me from across the room. She asked if I had seen it, and I nodded. She said somebody had tapped on our window, and she had seen the flashlight. She moved the front window curtains and pulled them back a bit, and said there was a car in our driveway with the lights off. She said she couldn't see the flashlight anymore. They must have seen her, because there was suddenly a loud knock at the front door screen, and we could hear it moving as someone tried to open it. We didn't move for about 30 seconds, and again, there was a loud knock. We heard a man's voice yell, "Hello? Is everyone all right? It's the police." My mum crept over to the front door and opened it part way, but left the screen door closed. From my vantage point, I could see it was just one man. My mum told him, "Yes, we're fine. Sorry we didn't answer, we were scared. We saw a flashlight in the yard and didn't know it was a cop." The man replied, "Yeah, I was looking around to make sure everything was all right, just in case." That didn't make any sense. My mum got confused and said, "Yeah, everything's fine. What's going on?" The cops seemed to get annoyed with my mum for some reason and just told her, "We got a 911 call from here, and there was nobody on the line. Just a lot of heavy breathing, and we thought you'd had a break-in." My mum clearly wasn't buying this. She quickly asked him, "You only send one guy for a break-in and walk around the yard for 10 minutes? And who called? I was asleep in bed." The cop sighed and said, "I was just being careful. Somebody called 911 from this residence on your landline, and we came to investigate." Both of us immediately knew it was a lie. My mum told him, "We don't have a landline. We haven't had a home phone in 6 years." The man threw himself against the screen door and shouted at my mother, "Let me in, Teresa." He yelled at her using her first name, and my mum yelled and shut the door in his face. He banged on the door several times, and my mum called her boyfriend. She yelled at the man and said she'd called the police and that he'd better get out of here and leave her alone. It seemed to do the trick, because the banging stopped, and in a few seconds we heard his engine start and he drove away. While we waited for my mum's boyfriend to show up, Mum asked me if I remembered how she had been stopped by a man pretending to be a cop when I was younger. She wouldn't say anything else, but I've come to suspect that the man who came to our door was the man who stopped her that night. We relayed the whole thing to our boyfriend, and he advised we actually call the police and tell them everything that had been happening to us. We heeded him and found out that there had actually been a call to our house from our phone number with nothing but heavy breathing. We never found out how that wouldn't have happened. We haven't seen the man since. I moved away at the end of June, and my mum never had any more break-ins or calls from blocked numbers. Whoever the man had been, and whatever his intentions were, he seems to have gone. I came down in September 2010 to visit my mum for a week, and I spent a lot of time napping on the couch while she was at work. On the evening before she took me back to the airport, my mum complained about me leaving smudges on the front windows. I got up to see what she was talking about, and my stomach leapt into my mouth. I told her that those weren't smudges, and on the front window that looked right onto the couch that I had been napping on were a pair of large, splayed handprints. I live in a town of about 11,000 in rural Wisconsin. Not by preference, but for a job. We are moving when we get a better one. I was on my way to my employer's house, as he runs the company out of his basement until we get a new office space, and I was being tailgated, badly, by a ratty blue car and a white bald guy. I drove a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, you are a mere few inches off my butt, and you will get me tapping my brakes. This guy did. He honked at me, whatever. I flip him off and slowed down to under 5 miles, under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind him, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had chances to pass me on the country road, but didn't. And after a few minutes with no other cars around, and him still kissing my bumper at 50, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around and take a picture of him. Then I pretended to call 911. I was in the country, with no other cars around, and this guy was getting creepy. I came to my turn, but decided to see if this guy would follow me. I turned left, and he followed. Then I came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him. I travelled the entire thing around twice, and he followed me. At this point, I knew he was messing with me and trying to scare me. Well, I decided to let myself be late for my meeting, and I began to drive to the police station, and he followed me the whole way there. I pulled up, parked, ran inside, and I thought he would leave. Nope, he parked right next to me and stared at me, and he pulled up on my side of the car, close enough that I would have a hard time opening the door all the way. He was in his 40s, I'm guessing, wearing sunglasses and a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, nothing scary there, and the interior of the car was pristine. I was looking for a gun though, and I should mention here that I'm training to become a behavioral analyst, and while I work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal behavior and profiling. I was seriously trying to read this guy. A few seconds went by and I grabbed my phone again, this time intent on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, he rolled down his passenger window, said nothing, rolled it back up and took off. I went inside and told a police officer what happened. Sadly, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate. Apparently there have been a lot of complaints about tailgaters recently, multiple, with a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and they gave me a card for victim services and a local women's shelter just in case he followed me home one night and I didn't feel safe. But I live in a secure building with my fiancée. I went out to my car and there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a crudely drawn smiley face. I took it back inside, and the officer said he'd call me a few times during the night, and I should avoid going anywhere alone for a while. He did call twice, and said he was patrolling my parking lot during his night shift. This is a small town, and the attitude around here is very communal, so I felt safe in that someone would back me up. If I ever see this guy again, no question, I'll call 911 and lead him straight to the police station again. I also told my fiancé that I will post my work schedule even when I have to leave for any other reason, and text him within 10 minutes of my estimated arrival. If I ever see this guy again, I will call 911, no question. Just a heads up, this story contains aspects of sexual abuse, and if you'd rather skip it, you will be able to find the appropriate link to the following story in the description. When I was young and just out of school, I was a bit of a shithead and had no real direction in my life and didn't really care about much. I partied hard and drank way too much. My uncle got me a job as a jackaroo, which here in Australia is essentially a trainee ranch hand. I wasn't all that keen, but decided I had to give it a go, and I had to get away from the bad influences of my friends and try and earn some money. I worked really hard. The hourly rate wasn't the best, but they fed you and gave you a place to stay. So I guess it works out. Some of the guys I worked with there were really cool, and the station was as big as a small European country. The station seemed to stretch off into the horizon and go on forever. Some stations over here had to have supplies dropped off by helicopter, as they were just far too large and remote. The station hand was given the task of mending the perimeter fence. It's over 600 kilometers long and takes between 10 and 14 days to check. So it's a two-man job. He nominates me to go along with him. The guy is around 27, beard, bogan as hell, and built like a brick shithouse. He barely says anything, but seemed like a decent guy at the time. The first 2 days, things are pretty normal. We follow the perimeter fence and check for holes where any livestock could get out of. We park up, do repairs, and then move on. It's tough work. Most days the temperature is above 40, so we start before sunrise, knock off 11 to 3, and then work until sunset. The third day, we're both feeling very tired, so we finish up early and set up camp. I put the tents up, and he gets the fire going. The sun has gone down, and it starts to cool off. We eat our dinner in front of the fire, and afterwards, I just sit near the fire looking up at the Milky Way. I still can't believe how many stars are visible out there. It's amazing. My workmate is having a bush shower, which is just a small pouch that leaks out water. I'm heating up the billy because I'll be next in, and he finishes and comes out wearing stubbies and a wife beater. I can't put my foot on it, but there is a different mood tonight. He's making me feel uncomfortable, and I'm not sure why. He was talking over dinner, but kept saying nothing at all now. He gets up, stands looking at the fire for a bit, and then stares at me. I'm thinking, what the hell? Is he gonna murder me? We are miles from anywhere, and he's twice my size. He could easily do it, and I would never be found. Suddenly, he says goodnight and goes into his tent. I'm not sure what all that was about, but I try and forget about it. I have my shower and turn in for the night. The next night is the same as the others. He takes a shower, and I hear him finish, and then he rustles around in his tent for a while. I'm just chilling, listening to the crackle of the fire while downing my beer. Every part of my body is aching from the work we had done that day. And out of nowhere, he stands in front of me, blocking my view of the fire. He's only about half a meter in front of me, which is awkward, and he doesn't say a word. I don't think anything either, but what the hell is going on? I'm starting to get very nervous, and the fear is kicking in. Just when I think he's about to pull his knife out and kill me, he pulls down the front of his shorts and flops his junk out and just stands there. Damn. Now this is not what I expected. I'm weirded out and not really sure what he expects me to do. I guess it's been months since he's had any action. But still, I didn't ask for this shit. We're about 200 kilometers from the nearest people, and it's only him and me. I'm totally inexperienced with this sort of stuff, and have only been with one chick before, and I'm about to stutter out no thanks, when he says in a deep voice, "No talking." I feel like I didn't have much of a choice in this. He pulls my head towards his junk, and if I was in any doubt of what he wanted before, now I know for sure. Now this wasn't my proudest moment, and I'll spare you the gory details, but I took the hint and did the deed. He finished in my mouth, which I wasn't all too thrilled about, and it happened a couple of more times while we were out there, but stopped when we got back to the rest of the workers. I finished work on the station shortly after, and now live and work in the city. But I won't forget that feeling when you are terrified and think that you are about to get murdered, only for it to turn into a sexually confusing, non-consensual sexual experience. A few years after my father had graduated from CSU, and my mother had graduated from TCU, they both had jobs at small companies in Fort Worth, Texas. Having met at a few company parties, and hitting things off a few years later, they finally got married, and my father got a job in Colorado for a small but growing engineering firm. So off they go, picking up and moving from Fort Worth, Texas to Colorado. Getting in a car with their few belongings, they start to make their way to Colorado. Now I'm not sure why they took the road they did, but instead of a larger interstate highway, my father and mother decided to take a smaller, not so traveled on highway on their final stretch back to my father's hometown, to catch Highway 14 to their new home. Having driven all day, and it being the middle of the night, my father had the idea of pulling off to the side of the road to sleep for a few hours, before waking up and finishing out the journey. There were no rest stops on this highway, so it was either side of the road or nowhere to rest. My mother agreed, but perhaps 20 minutes after stopping and trying to go to sleep, my mother didn't feel comfortable and decided instead of sleeping there, she would drive while my father rested, and when he woke up, she would rest while he took over. Just to reiterate, this is a not-so-traveled highway, and there are no lights, and my parents are in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest city or town isn't for miles. Not a mile or two down the road, my mother notices something on the side of the road, and as she gets closer, she notices it's just a single man in the middle of nowhere, with no lights or anything, just walking on the side of the road in the direction of where my parents were just parked. There was no car broken down further up the road, and there was nothing in miles to justify why this man would be walking out in the middle of nowhere. My parents didn't bring it up much, but they have always wondered what would have happened if they'd both have fallen asleep in their car on the side of the road that night. This happened last year, around this time. School had just started, and my only child was in kindergarten. She had only been in school for a few days. We live in a rural area, and we only have one car. So in the mornings, my daughter, her father, and I get up to take her dad to work. Then my daughter and I come home and get her ready for school. Because we live on a rural dead-end dirt road, we have to drive about half a mile down to the main road where her bus picks her up. Everything was fine that morning. I got her on the bus and headed home. I had the day off from work, and I only work part-time, so it was the middle of the week, and this was perfectly normal for me. I was doing some house cleaning and put away some laundry. I went into my daughter's room and started hanging up some clothes in her closet. I had the TV on in the living room, watching it from her room. Then I hear what sounds like a soft, muffled cough. I freeze. I have no idea what the hell it was, and I have no clue what to do. I'm just standing there almost paralyzed. My mind is racing. Maybe the cat is outside her window, hacking up a hairball. Was I going mad? Maybe it was the TV. It must have been the TV, right? Yeah, it's probably nothing. At this point, I'm still standing in her room, holding a shirt in a hanger, not moving a muscle. I really have no idea what to do. Then I think I should head next door and have my father-in-law check it out. I say out loud, "Screw it." I drop the shirt and hanger and take off running to the house next door. Luckily, my in-laws live in the house right next door, only about a football field away, and my father-in-law is on disability, so he's always almost home. He's in his mid-60s and in an oxygen tank most of the time, so I don't really know what I thought he could do to help protect me, but I was just really freaked out and didn't want to be alone. Plus, he was a hunter, and hunters have guns. So I am running faster than I have ever run before across our backyards and burst into his back door screaming his name. He comes walking out of the kitchen looking annoyed that I just scared the crap out of him, and I am on the verge of tears, telling him something is going on at my house, but I am talking so fast he can't figure out what I'm saying. So he tries to calm me down, and I tell him I think someone might be in my house. He asks if I'm sure, and I say yes. I'm begging for him to come over and just to check it out. He agrees, grabs his gun, and we jump into the truck and drive over. I wait in the truck with the doors locked while he goes in. I'm freaking out, looking all around me, and he's there for what seems like forever, and finally comes out and asks if I left a pack of Newports in her room near her bed on the floor. Now I am a smoker, but I smoke Camels, and I'd never bought Newports in my life. I tell him that they weren't mine. His eyes get huge, and he gets a really panicky look on his face. He tells me to stay in the truck and that he needs to call the cops. He hands me his phone to dial 911, and the lady says we'll have to wait for state troopers because we don't live in town. They take about an hour to reach us, and I've already called my husband at work. He called his brother to come pick us up, and he doesn't work far from the house, and it only takes about 20 minutes for them to show up. My father-in-law, my husband, and his brother are now walking all around in the woods that surround my house. Nothing. There isn't anyone besides us. And after a while, the state trooper shows up and takes a look around as well, and finds nothing. He takes the pack of cigarettes, I guess as evidence, and takes my statement, along with my father-in-law's statement. He tells us there really isn't anything he can do. I can't tell him what the guy or girl looked like because I didn't see anyone. There is nothing. Just a sound I heard and smokes on the floor, but nothing is amiss from the house. There isn't anyone there now, and it doesn't look like forced entry. Of course, there isn't going to be forced entry, I thought. We're in the middle of nowhere. Why the hell would I lock my door when I leave to go somewhere? I feel like such an idiot. But nobody locks their door around here. I don't even have a key for the door on my keyring. We just keep it on top of the outside fridge, just in case. After the trooper leaves, my father-in-law gives my husband the gun to hold, just in case someone comes back. My husband and brother-in-law change all the locks on the doors that day, and now we keep a key on our keyrings and keep the doors locked at all times. We didn't take our daughter out of school that day. She was only 5, and we thought it would just stress her out unnecessarily. We did let the school know to be on the lookout for some weird activity, and we had a talk with our daughter about stranger danger and what to do if she sees someone in the house she doesn't know. I did have her sleep in our bed for a few weeks, but she just seemed like she wanted to return to her own room, because she's not a baby anymore. That was it. Life moved on and nothing happened since. We never heard from the trooper, or had any form of follow-up. And we never had another incident like that again. Oh, I have no idea what they were planning on doing. I don't know if they were after me or my daughter, or if they just wanted to rob us. Although if they did, I don't know why they didn't take the opportunity when I was out of the house. So, as far as I'm concerned, it was something far darker. I still get paranoid from time to time, and I hate to be alone in the house. My husband got me a dog to keep me company and help protect us. I hope with time, the fear will diminish. Please, always lock your doors no matter how safe you think your neighborhood is. You never know who just might be passing through. I live in a very rural mountainous area of California, and at the time I was working as a cook in a restaurant and bar. I was 24 and not in the best place financially at the time, so I had been borrowing my uncle's car to drive to and from work. I worked from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I know everyone in this area well, and I don't have a single enemy. I get along with everyone. One night, I was closing up the kitchen and decided to have a beer before going home. The bartender was talking to a fellow community member and trying to get him to go home, but he was too drunk for his own good. There were some out-of-towners that weren't too fond of the locals' demeanor, and it seemed like it was getting intense between them. I just saw it as a local that I knew was being annoyingly drunk but perfectly harmless. I had my beer and went out and got into my car. I could see the bar and spotted the drunk local, completely smashed. I felt bad for not offering him a ride home, but was tired from work and told myself that he would be okay. I drive away. Mind you, there's no street lamps or buildings in the middle of nowhere. It's pitch black, quiet, and I realize about a mile from the bar that I should turn around and offer him a ride. He didn't live far, and it wouldn't have been very far out of my way to do so. I turn at a muddy turn and go back. I get to the car and basically was short with the local and told him that I would pick him up in the morning and he could get his truck sober, that I'll give him a ride home tonight. I was 24 at the time and a small-built female, and he was a smaller-built 35-ish looking male. I knew this guy. He'd hit on me in the past, but I assumed he was just a 35-year-old lonely weirdo who I always shrugged off when it came to his advances. Within a couple of minutes of reasoning, he finally hopped into the car, and I took off driving towards his home, about 5 miles away on winding mountain roads. I didn't notice anything at first. He seemed drunk, quiet, and mumbly. But not too long into the drive, he starts saying thank you, how nice I am for helping him out, and I say the usual, of course, it's no problem. I couldn't let him be there knowing full well he wouldn't be able to drive. And this is where I start getting creeped out. I make a turn on the road he lives on. It's a long road with not many houses. All of the driveways are long, about a mile or two, so you don't really see any houses, and he gets really quiet, and it's dark in the car. I can't see him really well, and I notice him look at me. I could see the reflection of his eyes from the dim lights on the radio. There is something I remember very vividly. His eyes gleamed a kind of green from the lights on the radio knob. He was just looking at me. I, without returning his gaze, said, "What's up? Why are you looking at me like that?" He says to me, "You're so pretty, and I never thought I'd get a chance to be with you alone." I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, although I started regretting my decision. All of a sudden, he reaches over to me while I'm driving and tries to put his hand, I'm assuming, on my breast, but it instead lands on my shoulder/neck area. I start yelling at him, telling for him to stop, and slam on my brakes in the middle of the road with no one behind me. And I scream at him to get out of my car, and I repeat it over and over. At this point I had my hands on the wheel, and I was trying to push him out the car. I leaned over and opened the car door. I had never, in my life, realized my own strength, my own weak strength. This 30-something-year-old male was not budging against me, and I noticed him laughing, a really sloppy laugh, and he says, "You and I both know that no one is around." And I said to him, "We just left the bar with at least 5 people who know where you are going. Please stop. Here's a flashlight, walk home, I'm done with you tonight." He is quiet for a minute before saying, "I don't feel much like walking." The way he said it scared the living shit out of me. I start screaming, not like a horse scream, but like an ear-piercing scream. I knew the scream was strong and loud, and I even hurt my own ears, just hoping someone would have heard it. But nothing happened. We struggled for what felt like minutes as he kept trying to come onto me. The entire time, he was laughing. He was drunk, and that was probably my only advantage. He was sloppy and trying to attack me for whatever reason. I pushed on him like I'd never pushed on anything before in my life. I pushed so hard that I felt my arms burning with pain. When he finally left my car, I slammed on the gas, not even bothering with the door, remembering I was heading down a long-ass road in the middle of nowhere, and not on my road. It was a dead-end road after about 20 miles, so I kept driving down this road that I knew well, knowing full well I would need to stop to turn around. But this road is like 1.5 lanes wide, and there are hardly any turnouts. When I finally do, I turn around fast in someone's dirt driveway, afraid of the car being still for even a second. I take off driving, knowing he'll be up ahead any second. I never see him, and never saw him again. He was a local I'd known for years and saw frequently. I don't know if he took off for another area out of embarrassment, but I never saw him again after this. I arrived home red, shaking, scratched and out of breath. My boyfriend and our friend were at home playing Jenga, and I told them immediately, and they knew who it was. And they went to try and find him, but never saw him again either. And that was last November. Still leaves me wondering, but I'm glad I never have to meet him again. From 2006 to 2008, I was a student at a university in England, studying paramedic science. This course was a 2-year fast track into becoming a qualified paramedic. The course involved placements at various points throughout both years. First, we spent an evening/night in a dispatcher's. I'll never forget some of those calls, e.g. a man waking up in his bed with his wife next to him, who had died during the night. Next, we were stationed with the patient transport service, taking patients to their hospital appointments when they couldn't get there alone. Finally, after waiting a good 6 months for the opportunity, it was time to spend at a prolonged placement with the 999 crews, which is the equivalent of the emergency services. You could choose a couple of preferred locations, and I was fortunate enough to be given the ambulance station closest to my home. So I moved back to my parents' home that full winter term, leaving my university buddies behind. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't, because it turned out to give me far less of an interesting experience. The station was in Buxton, Derbyshire. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's about 45 minutes to the nearest hospital, so you better not get badly hurt up there. Only people did. One evening, we respond to a call where a guy had come off his bike near a pub, which passes over the Pennines, which are a mountain range. Bikers love to bomb it up and down, and it's notorious. The guy broke a brick wall with his body. Legs were all over his shoulders. We took him with the blue lights to the aforementioned hospital. I don't think he survived. This is where things got messed up. We turn out of our hospital, travel maybe half a mile, and get flagged down by a pedestrian. She shouts through the window that someone has been beaten badly, and we later find out that this was the case of somebody bumping into somebody else in the bar. Nothing more. At that moment, a guy in a red t-shirt stumbles out from the side street and collapses in the road. I had been in the rear passenger seat of the patient compartment, and my mentor and her technician were riding up front. They get out there before me to help him, while I open up the side bay. Stupidly, I climb out as my mentor helps him in. That's the only point, which I notice two things. He isn't wearing a red shirt. He's topless, and saturated head to waist in his own blood. And there's a mob of people heading straight for us, about 10 to 15. I'm outside the ambulance and pretty much frozen in terror, as I'm only 19 at this point, and a pussy. Thankfully, my mentor hauls me inside and locks the door instantly. She then turns to me and asks if the rear door is locked. It is not. They open it from the outside. My mentor pushes them back and heckles them. I couldn't believe it, telling them to pick on a group of people, not just one man. She then manages to lock the door. And what happens next will stick with me forever, and clearly has as I'm telling this story near 10 years later. They begin to try and flip over the ambulance. Meanwhile, another guy starts hammering the side window, shatters it, and cuts himself wide open with blood everywhere, but keeps going. They were animals. There is a window between the rear and the front cabin, and we see a police car approaching. He doesn't stop and continues straight past us. Only later did I find out that the keys were still in the ignition, but nobody had attempted to enter the cabin through sheer luck. Anyway, we managed to make it out of there alive. And after everything that I went through, I went off and became an English teacher instead. The number of dead bodies I saw in the time I was there was enough to haunt me for life. To all you brave service folk, I commend you. So the house that I spent a lot of my childhood at had a large forest right behind it, and me and my sister would spend hours exploring it and climbing around it. It was totally innocent fun, and we would spend days out there just doing the usual kid stuff, pretending to be explorers and the like. The woods were pretty thick, but eventually opened up to a large retention pond. About another quarter of a mile past that was a main road. About 6 years into living at this house, the Florida Highway Patrol decided to put a small prison right there, in between the retention pond and the road. So, for some context, it went our house, the woods, the retention pond, the prison, and the main road. My sister and I really didn't think much of it at first. We kept exploring and hiking out there. Then one day, we went a little too far and got close to the edge of the prison. We were walking the perimeter of where the retention pond met the forest and were walking towards the prison. At this point, we are about 100 yards from the prison, and that's when things got weird. We walked up to what was a small opening into the forest, and there was a stump and a chair. So naturally, Being curious kids, we investigated. No one was there, but when we got closer to the stump, we saw a hand-drawn map of the area, including our neighborhood, with a knife stuck through it, pinning it to the stump. A pack of cigarettes was there too, and one was still smoking. We freaked out and ran home, and a couple of nights later, around midnight, we were sitting in bed and heard this ear-piercing scream. What sounded like a teenage girl coming from the woods. She screamed for a while, and then it was just nothing. Complete silence and darkness. Needless to say, we didn't go to the woods a lot after that, and I still don't know what happened back there. I am a land surveyor, 36 years in rural South Florida. I have found and seen many strange things out in the woods. I found a dead guy tied to a tree, out in the middle of the Everglades. He had been there for about 2 weeks, and we smelt him before we saw him. He had mostly been picked clean by critters and ants, but the stench remained. Most of his bones were still in his clothes, which were still being held by the ropes around the tree. His skull was nowhere to be seen. We found a few rural sites where satanic and/or voodoo ceremonies were held, replete with voodoo dolls, dead chickens, pentagrams, goat skulls, and the like. We also found a board about 12 feet long nailed to trees at each end and about 6 feet off the ground. Nailed into the board were 24 small animal feet, just the feet, out in the middle of nowhere. I also found a human skull at an abandoned sawmill, just sitting there on the shelf. The skull had been sawn in half horizontally through the forehead, in what appeared to be a surgical manner with surgical precision. It definitely did not go through the saw at the mill, and it appeared to be very old, according to the cops, and was more probably a movie prop, although real. I also found a crashed Cessna plane that no one else had noticed for a number of years. There were no bones, but there was a lot of evidence of decayed contraband, of the white stuff, and we also found a lot of weed. We've seen a lot of other crazy ass shit, but hey, it's Florida. I was in Australia travelling. I got involved with an anti-logging protest movement in the southwest. We camped out in the forests, keeping an eye to ensure that no logging happened. Some of the locations were very remote, and there was also antagonism towards us from some of the loggers. One night, wishing to take a break from the campground, a group of us retreated to a small abandoned cottage, hidden away that not many people knew about. The idea was to hide from the loggers and to just chill out for a while. Everybody fell asleep after a while, except for me. I decided to go outside for a little wander about. Time for a little backstory. My best friend Paddy back in Ireland had died a month previously while I was still in Australia. I only found out the bad news when I called home to find out that he had just been buried, so I didn't even make it to the funeral. I felt very distant from it all, and I hadn't grieved properly for him. So I step outside the door of this cottage, feeling at that moment very content. I look up at the sky, and there is this beautiful Southern Cross Australian Milky Way spread out across the sky. The sky looks wonderful, I thought. Then the thought occurred to me out of the blue. Paddy's up there. He's a star. And then it hit me. The grief that hadn't come out before just all came crashing out. I started sobbing uncontrollably, conscious that I didn't want to wake anyone else up in the cabin. I started to run, and as I ran, the sobbing merged with the running until I kind of had a rhythm, and I was coming round, feeling glad that I had unleashed it from my system. When this happened, I was running through a wide clearing along a dirt animal path leading towards a big mound of bushes in the center of the clearing. I ran into the middle of it, thinking nothing of it, and all of a sudden, the bushes explode around me, while thrashing and grunting and thumping on the ground, and bodies move around really fast. I was petrified. Then I catch a glimpse of what it was. A mob of kangaroos that had all been sleeping under the bushes, until I came blundering in and terrified all of them. And then it struck me. Was this Paddy playing a trick on me from above when I got upset? And then, at that moment, I knew that there was a greater energy than just people running about on the surface of the planet. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's edition of Scary Stories. If you did, please remember to drop a like and hit that subscribe button. Remember that I do post every night, so why not subscribe and hit the bell icon to be up to date with everything I post. If you have a story that you would like to share and have read on Mortis Media, all that you need to do is send it to my email, and I'll make sure to get to it. But please ensure that you have included as much description and punctuation as possible, as that will maximize your chances of it being read. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.